Public Affairs Committee for organizing this, and Fred Salt, the chair of the department, as well. I think the last time I gave a talk in front of this department, I was applying for a job here. So the message I'd like to say now is, it's too late, suckers. So this is a new area of research for me. So I'd appreciate any criticisms. I also have copies of the paper here and copies of off prints of a couple of articles that are related to the general topic. Right over there, if you want to get one at the end of the talk. Basically, the context for this is I'm working on a book on fanaticism. Some of my undergraduates definitely know, and so I want to write a political theory of extremism, and the question of extremism and its relation to violence kept coming up, and I really kind of dodged the question for a long time. But finally, someone asked me to write something on religion, the relationship between religion and violence, for a Blackwell book on religion and violence, and asked me to write it. So I said, well, all right, here's that'll force me to confront the question. So what this talk is basically my first draft of this article. So again, I appreciate any suggestions to improve this analysis here. And start here by with the famous mural called "The Tragic Prelude," which is on display at the Kansas State Capitol. And as you can see in the Tragic Prelude here, well, you can't see so well, unfortunately, but this is John Brown, and you have the South and the North battling each other in the Civil War, dead soldiers here, and the tornadoes embodying Kansas and westward expansion. But of course, centering this mural is the figure of John Brown. John Brown being that figure who brings about the tragic, Kansas being the tragic prelude to the Civil War. And you notice that John Brown, in addition to being the largest, larger than life, literally figure here in the mural, he's got a Bible in one hand and a Sharps rifle in the other hand. And so one of the questions I'm interested in is what is it that brings the gun and the Bible together for John Brown? And what is it that brings the gun and the Bible together for, or the Quran, or whatever sacred text you want to put there? What is it that brings religion and violence together for political actors? Now, I think that the story of religion and violence is a story about politics, ultimately. But it's not a story about politics as usual, or by which I mean politics as the management of public affairs and the electoral contest over who's going to do the managing. Rather, this is a story about extraordinary politics, or conflicts, by which I mean conflicts over the very terms by which public affairs are administered and disputes are settled. If ordinary politics is like a contest between two teams in a sporting event, then extraordinary politics is the struggle to define the rules by which the game is played. And the relationship between religion and violence, then, is a story about the extraordinary struggle to define the rules by which we engage in ordinary politics. So Brown is kind of here, the function of Brown is, in a sense, is he's setting the rules. He's changing the rules of the game by which we will all later play. So what I want to do in this talk is investigate the relationship between religion and violence through an examination of Protestant violence in the United States. And I'm going to look at, I want to answer why some American Protestants defend, advocate, and/or engage in violence in the name of God. And I want to look at this by examining the role of violence in the fanatical wings of two of the most significant Protestant social movements in United States history, the abolitionist movement and the anti-abortion or pro-life movement. I guess the other significant social movement, the third one, would of course be the Protestant social movement in U.S. history, of course, would be the civil rights movement. I'm going to look at the abolitionists and the anti-abortion movements here. And I want to use three key political theorists of violence, Hannah Arendt, Karl Marx, and Franz Fanon, to understand the role of violence in these movements. My basic argument is this. Religious extremists don't just sympathize with the victims of oppression, in this case slaves and the unborn, though they could be workers, women, racial ethnic groups, the earth, animals, etc. But religious extremists don't just sympathize with the victims of oppression. They powerfully identify with them. The radical abolitionists identified with the slave. Am I not a man and a brother? Challenge, one of the most famous popular abolitionist slogans. And you think about radical pro-lifers who consider attacking abortion clinics and attacking abortion providers to be a form of, quote, defensive action. Both movements exhort their participants to love thy neighbor as thyself. Love thy neighbor as thyself. And so what you have here is an identification with the oppressed. And this identification, I argue, turns sympathy into ontology. Turns sympathy into ontology. In other words, it turns being compassionate towards the downtrodden to a sense of being one with the downtrodden, even to the point of feeling oppressed yourself. Now, this word ontology, I just mean in the simple word, ontology means the study of being. What does it mean to be something? If the very being of the oppressed presumes struggle, if the worker's nature, if the worker's ontology is to struggle against the capitalist, if the colonized ontology or nature is to struggle against the settler, if the slave's ontology is to struggle against the master, if the unborn is the locus of struggle between a cosmic battle between good and evil, then identification with the oppressed presumes struggle as well. And when a person so powerfully identifies with the oppressed that she acts as if she's one of the oppressed, then violence committed on their behalf becomes a form of self-defense, even if you strike first. So this notion of ontological violence changes the debate over whether religious violence is strategic or not. We'll talk a little bit about that. But because for the religious zealot, means essentially are ends. Principle becomes expediency, and violence, in other words, becomes both instrumental, a means to achieve an end, and an end in itself, part of the very being of what it means to be an oppressed category and to resist that category of oppression. So this merging of means and ends, or the instrumental and ontological defenses of violence, is what characterizes religious violence by Protestant extremists. Now, by religious violence, simple definition, I just mean violence inspired by a perceived religious duty and or designed to achieve a religious objective. I'll let the actors define for themselves what constitutes a religious duty or religious objective. That's all I mean by it. Basically, in the literature, two different ways of looking at the relationship between religion and violence. One is by a sociologist named Marx in a book from 2000, Terror in the Mind of God. Juergensmeyer argues that to explain that religious violence comes out of what he calls a culture of violence. And a culture of violence consists of two elements. First of all, a notion of cosmic war. And a notion of cosmic war is a belief among religious adherents that there is this cosmic battle of good against evil that has come to the earth. And this sense of cosmic war gets combined with what he calls a Satanization of the enemy. By Satanization of the enemy, it means that whoever your opponent is on this earth comes to embody that cosmic evil. So if you think about bin Laden's notion of a cosmic war between the the Zionist Crusader Alliance and the Ummah, all Muslims worldwide, and a war of unbelief, as Sayyid Qutb would call it, then it turns into, then what you do, when you combine that with the Satanization of the enemy, the United States military, for example, embodies that evil. Then this creates a culture in which violence is possible.